recording. All right. So what we'll do, you can see I have a bazillion tabs over here because over the weekend I was writing some scripts to make my job easier to continue to type more material for this class. So I'll show you guys what I did over the weekend. Because when we talk about pass by reference, as a type of parameters, that tool comes in handy, and you'll see the new way of presenting a trace in my notes. Okay, so this does not impact you too much, but it does make my job a lot easier. All right. So the first thing we're going to do today, let me see, it is time. So I'm going to talk about the solutions to the homework assignment first, and then we'll go ahead and move on to talk about the other type of parameters. Parameters, yes. So do we have any questions about anything before I get started with giving you guys the answer to the homework assignment? All right. Seeing none. So what I'll do is I am going to do the usual thing, which is taking a snapshot of the code, and then I'll use a spreadsheet. Oh, okay, nope, not that. Have to remember to hold on to the mouse button harder with this keyboard. There we go. All right, so we'll open this one on the side and make it always on top. Please mute your phone if you don't mind. All right, so what I'll do is I'm going to start a new document, but this time it is a document that is starting with a template, which I made over the weekend, which looks, oh, actually, I cannot do that yet. Okay, let's go back because I need to change one thing in the template before I can use it actually as a template. So for those of you who are interested in scripting, Google Doc, Google Sheets, they're all scriptable. So it's actually a very interesting platform to practice programming. So what I'm doing right now is I'm defining a function inside Google Sheets to do some custom stuff that I needed to do. And I'll show you what that actually does, in just a little bit. Return, and you can refer to a library, and the library currently has only one function, and I'm going to call that function from here. Save. Okay. And now I can close that. And then I can make the new sheet for the demonstration today out of the same template. There we go. Takes a little bit of time. Okay. And I will name today's spreadsheet the same as today's date, which is 2025, and today is the 14th. Okay. There we go. And I'm going to trace this code over here. So do we have any questions about, how to trace that code before I give you guys the answer? Nope, no questions. Okay. All right. So I'm going to move this screen a little bit closer to me, okay, because my eyes are not as good as yours. All right. So the first line that we start execution from is in main, and typically we start with either line 5 or line 6. Either way is fine. But before we do that, we'll label the columns. So we got comments, we got line number. The precondition has nothing to say because before we get to main, there are no variables to talk about. X is not a global variable, it is a local variable, which means it does not exist until we get to main. So we get to main on line either 5 or 6. Okay, doesn't matter which one you start with. So you can say line 5, you can say line 6. But as we get into main, X starts to exist, which means we have to allocate a column for it. The way we do allocation is always going to be the leftmost available column. Columns A and B are in use already. So column C is the leftmost available column. So when we allocate, we give it a name, which is the name of the local variable x. And we also have to give it a value. All local variables start with unknown values. So that's why it is going to get a question mark here. And then we move on to line 6. 6 is not doing anything. We get to line 7. So line 7 is an interesting line because it is a conditional statement. It's the beginning of a conditional statement because you can see it starts with if. But I cannot determine whether we should go for the then statement, which is on line 8, or the else statement, which is on line 10 at this point, because I have to call the function 1 first to find out what that function is going to return as a value, and then compare that to 1. Then we can determine whether to go for the then statement or the else statement. So that means, we need to call the function 1. To call the function 1, we need to allocate a column, not for return line number, but we simply call that return. Okay, so we just call it return. And this column helps the function being called, which is function 1, to keep track of what does it do when it needs to return a value or when they execute the return statement. So there are quite a few things it has to track. First thing is we have to get back onto line 7. But getting back to line 7 is not enough information because exactly what else do we need to do on line 7? Well, the only thing that we know is this question mark, which is taking the place of the invocation itself, is going to be resolved to a specific value, but we still have to compare that to the value of 1, and also, then we can determine what to do with the rest of that line. So this is what line 7 is recorded in the return column, which is in column D. And then after that, after we kind of remember what else we need to do after function 1 returns, then we can proceed to line 1 and 2 of the function. So before I move on, I want to see if there are any questions. No questions. All right. So now we proceed to line 1, which doesn't do anything, but it is symbolic that we are starting with line 1. And then on line 2, that's the only line in function 1, that actually does anything. Whenever we execute the return statement, what do? We There are 3 steps. Nope. Before we deallocate, we have to make use of that column. But before we make use of that column, we have to find that column. Which column are we going to use? The rightmost column that is labeled return. Okay, so that would be column D. And then the next thing we do is we copy and paste the entire cell over here and then change the question mark to the value that we are actually returning. So can someone tell me what value am I returning on line 2? The value of 1. Okay, there we go. So we replace the question mark with a 1, and that's all we need to do for step 2. Step 3 is to say, oh, okay, so this is telling us what else we need to do on line 7. So we copy and paste this line to one row, after the current row. So because the current row is row 8, so now we move on to row 10. We copy and paste it over here. And then we have to remember that this column D, is no longer in use because we just made use of it. So what we do is we simply copy and paste the name of the column and then use a strikeout to mark that column is no longer in use. And then we continue execution on line 7 at this point. All right. So do we have any questions about these particular steps when we execute the return statement? No questions. So we are all good. All right. So now that we're back to line 7, we now know what the condition of the conditional statement looks like. It is 1 equals to 1, which is true. So now we have to go to comments and say 1 equals 1 is indeed true. So now we can move on to which line? Line 8, that is correct. Okay, so we move on to line 8. And this is the first time we get to line 8. Line 8 is x gets the return value of 1 plus the return value of 1. The computer does not have quote unquote common sense. It cannot eyeball the algorithm and know that, oh, function 1 just always returns a constant of 1. So when we trace this code, we cannot just say, oh, 1 plus 1 is a 2, and we just update x to 2 and we are all done. That does not work. Okay. The purpose of this class is to make sure that you understand exactly how the computer is going to execute this code. It is not so much the end result of putting a value of 2 in x that is important. It is the mechanism by which it calculates the value of 2 that is important. Okay, so what we'll do is we're going to look at line 8 and go like, okay, what do we need to do to calculate the right hand side of the assignment? Well, it has two calls to one. We can only handle one call at a time. Now, you can handle the right one first, you can handle the left one first, but since most of us read from left to right in English, so we are going to go from left to right in that order. So that means we're going to call one again, which means we can now reallocate column D because column D was previously deallocated. So now it is available again. So now we reallocate column D for the purposes of tracking what do I need to do when we return. And when we return, we'll still be getting back to line 8, except line 8 will be a little bit simpler than it is now because the first or the left-hand side of the call is going to be resolved by the time we return from 1. So that's why you will put a question mark here. Once again, the question mark is a placeholder. Okay, it is a placeholder so that the called function, which is 1 in this case, knows exactly where to put the return value. Okay, all right. So after this, after we remember what else we need to do when we get back onto line 8, we can now proceed to function 1 again. Once again, line 1 doesn't do anything. Line 2 is going to return a value, a constant of 1. Once again, we copy and paste, and then we change the question mark to a 1, and then we copy this cell to 2 rows. We skip 1 row, and then we copy and paste the cell, and then we just deallocate the column by striking out the label. And now we continue execution on line 8. So line 8 is not quite ready to perform the addition because we still don't know what the other one, the other invocation of function 1 is going to return. So we're going to do the whole thing again, reallocate column D for return purposes, and at this time, we have to say, by the time we get back to line 8, x equals to 1 plus question mark. The 1 is already resolved. The one on the left-hand side is fully resolved already. It is the one on the right-hand side of the addition that we need to resolve this time. And that's why that is the one, that invocation is the one that is replaced by question mark this time. Then we proceed to the function being called, which is 1. Line 1 doesn't do anything. Line 2, once again, is going to return the constant of 1. So we copy and paste the entire cell, change the question mark to a 1 because now we have resolved what the return value is. And then we copy and paste this to 2 cells or 2 rows, excuse me, after this. And then we mark this column as deallocated. And I can just copy and paste the one that is already struck out like this. So now we continue execution on line 8. This time, the right-hand side of the equal or the assignment operator is fully resolved. It is 1 plus 1, which is a value of 2. It is only at this time that we can update variable x, which is column C, to a value of 2. And then after that, we get to line 12 because this is line 8 is the only statement in the then statement. So we after line 8, we proceed to line 12. Line 12 usually we do not track anything because it is the end of the main function. So we are now at the post, which means this concludes the execution of the entire code. Yes, yes, we do. Thank you. I forgot about that. So the column C, which is representing variable x, local variable x, also needs to be deallocated at this point. Thank you. I forgot about that. Okay. Good job. All right. So I'll be doing okay so far with this program or the trace thereof. Okay. So it sounds really tedious to you, I'm sure. Okay, because there are a lot of steps just to say, oh, we are just putting a value of 2 in local variable x. Yes, I understand it looks really tedious because this is exactly what the computer has to do in order to get this done. But the mechanism is actually very important because understanding the full mechanism of calling and returning, what do we do when we have a call to a function that has a return value? This is all basically the fundamental of programming. It is not specific to C++ programming either. All modern programming languages would behave similarly, okay, if not exactly like this. The only difference between most programming languages is the syntax, okay? It's just like, in some syntax, we use a semicolon, in some others, we do not use a semicolon, and so on. But the underlying principle of how a program executes stays exactly the same, okay? So do we have any questions about this trace? We do not have any questions about this trace. All right. Any questions about the format? Any questions about the concept behind the trace itself? All right. I'm not seeing any questions. All right. So I will then, basically conclude the discussion of the homework assignment, which is this one here. So let me see if more people turn in their homework. Nope. We only got 19 people who turned in the homework. All right. So that will bring us back to parameters. In other words, we are returning to parameters. And I added a little bit more to parameters. Okay. So let me talk about, what changes I have made to parameters. So this part is still the same. This part is still the same. This part is changed a little bit. So I changed the way the source code is represented. So now it looks like a table too, because I wrote a script in Google Sheets to kind of make this easy. So this way I don't have to manually generate the line number thing on the right hand side, as comments. It's just an easier way for me to do things. And I'll show you guys, how I got that done. And also, the trace itself is also represented. This is the recursive algorithm that we talked about on last Wednesday. Okay, I hope you guys remember the discussion of the recursive algorithm on last Wednesday. So the trace was already done in class, but I copied and pasted it over here. The difference between this and all the previous traces, like this one over here, is I also have the column number as well as the row number of the trace represented in the table. So it seems like a minor change to you, but it is a necessary change in order to talk about the next concept. Are we are we okay so far? Okay. So what is recursion? Do you remember when we talked about the algorithm last Wednesday? What makes a function recursive? You can still look at it now. I mean, this is a function that is a little bit strange compared to many other functions that we have talked about in this class. In what sense is it a little bit strange? Come on, you guys know the answer? Yep, and each smaller part is similar to the original problem. And therefore, you can call the function itself to handle the quote unquote smaller problem. So in this case, you can see how in the function f here, this entire thing from line 1 all the way to line 7 is the definition of function f. But you can see in function f, there's a function call invocation to function f itself. So some people may think, oh, but that means it's going to call itself indefinitely. Well, that is not true, because when we call function f again inside function f, we're only passing n minus 1 to that particular invocation, which means for each nested call of function f, the value n is going to decrement by 1, which means at some point, the value of n is going to be less than 2, at which point it will return a constant of 1, and then we'll start to unwind all the nested call at that point. The demonstration was already done on last Wednesday, which is this particular trace here, which is also available as one of the Google Sheets that I captured in class. So I just want to emphasize it is important to review the sample code that I go over in class, because all of those are, each one is trying to illustrate a particular concept. So it's not just reading the module that is important. Taking notes is also important, but reviewing all the traces that we have done in class is also important. Okay, that's part of your studying. You should allocate time for doing that as well. Now, everything that is already in a sheet, okay, they're all indicated by the date when that class was done or when that sheet was captured. So what you can do, okay, is to go to File, and then you go to make a copy. In other words, you can make a copy of the traces that we have done so far in this class, and then you can annotate the your own version any way you want. There are many ways to do this. One is go to a particular cell. Okay, if you want to leave some note to yourself, you can always go to Insert and then go to, I think, Comments. Okay, scroll down a little bit. So you can go to Insert Comment or Insert Note. So this way you can annotate the traces that we have done in class. If you think that my discussion or my explanation is not captured well in the notes, you can add your own note specifically to the trace. Okay, and that is yours, right? So you can do it any way you want. Now, personally, I have never used note, so we'll see what it does. Okay, so this is good, like copy and paste D6 and then change, oops, the question mark to the value being returned. All right. So it means, the comment or the note is not going to show all the time. It only shows when you're hovering over the cell. So then the note appears. So I want to see what happens to insert comment. I think comment is on the right hand side of the screen. So we'll go ahead and try that here. Um, Change the question mark to the value being returned. Comment. Oh, okay. So this one appears as a bubble. So once again, there are many ways for you to kind of add your own note. Okay. Well, unfortunately, these do not print out, naturally. You can always, go to column A and leave your comment, in addition to mine. You can also add it here. So that way it always displays and explain what that particular role of the trace is trying to illustrate. So all I'm doing here is to give you, some additional tools to take notes, okay, after the fact, after the lecture itself. All right. Any questions? No questions? All right. I know it would sound like I'm nagging because I am nagging. Okay. For a class like this, okay, and for all the CISP and for all the math classes, for sure, you need to spend about twice the amount of time as you spend in the lecture in order to review, annotate your notes, organize your notes, and basically come up with your own study guide for the next exam along the way. So you need that much time. Okay. For this class, we are meeting 80 minutes per lecture twice a week. So that's 160 minutes. So that means you need to spend 320 minutes, 5 hours, okay, about approximately 5 hours per week to review the material, to study, and so on. Okay, so if you're not spending much time after the lectures, um, it's not necessarily a bad thing, okay, but it does mean that you may not have spent enough time to work on the material for this class. Is that okay so far? All right. All right, so with that all said and done, we are going to move on to the next type of parameters. Okay, as we can see here, another kind of parameter. So what we have talked about so far, the parameter that we have talked about so far is called pass by value because n as a parameter has its own value. So that means when we refer to n, we are referring to the value of the column where we find n. So the new kind of parameter is called pass by reference, which gives us a way to refer to something that does not belong to the function itself. Okay, so the way we designate a pass by reference parameter as opposed to a pass by value parameter is very simple. It's very subtle. Okay, the only syntactic difference or the only thing that you can see that is different is we put an ampersand before the name of the parameter. With that ampersand, it means the parameter is now passed by reference as opposed to passed by value. The difference between passing by value versus passing by reference is subtle, but it is a very important one. Any parameter that is passed by reference by itself does not have a value. By itself, it is a reference to someone else. So now we have to have the mechanism to say, oh, this parameter is really a reference to that other column in the trace. And as a result, I need to make sure that I can capture the column information, in a table. Because before, I cannot say, I cannot refer to a column like this trace here. You can see that there are no references to the column number. And as a result, I cannot say, oh, this thing is actually referring to this column over here. But by the time we talk about pass by reference, that mechanism is now needed. So that's why we need to use a different format to capture um, the trace in the notes itself. All right. So what I'll do is I am going to go over just this example first, and then we'll go over an example that is actually also in the module already. I just made this morning, so I'm not anticipating anyone to have a chance to read this ahead of time. So we're gonna go, we'll look at this, and see, how we can trace this. Instead of just reading the trace here, which is already done, I am going to do the usual thing, which is, to capture the algorithm with a snapshot, and then we'll trace it in a spreadsheet in Google Sheet. All right, so we'll put it on the side, and this is going to be sheet 2. So I'm going to rename the sheet, the tab here. This is for the homework, okay, the homework that you just turned in earlier this morning. This is the answer to the homework. And this one here is basically saying that we have a comment. So comments, are reflected, in the tab here, but not so much with notes. Okay, so uh, another difference between those two. All right, so I'm going to use this new sheet to capture what happens when we execute the code that is displayed on the right-hand side. All right, same as usual, we have comments, and then we have line number. The precondition, there's nothing to say because we do not have any global variables. So now we start execution either on line 4 or 5, doesn't really matter. Okay, so line 4, we allocate a column for x. It starts with an unknown value. And then on line 5, it doesn't really do anything. So we skip to line 6. X is given a value of 5. And then on line 7, we call function x. This time function x has a return type of void. A return type of void means there's no return value. Does it return? Yes. But does it return a value? The answer is no, it does not return a value. So that usually means the function call is going to take up the entire line. Like in this case, line number 7 is just calling the function because it does not return a value to be utilized in an expression or to do something else with it. So that means, in this case, it is a simplified kind of trace because we just have to keep track of the return line number. The return line number is, logically what line is following line 7 in this case. So line 8 is logically following line 7, so we just put an 8 here. And then we continue execution in the function, which starts on line 1, which doesn't really do anything. Oh, I forgot one thing. I forgot that there's a parameter. Okay, so we have to allocate for the parameter first. The parameter is called n. Return line number is here. Return line number is 8. So typically, the parameter n is given the value of whatever argument I use that matches the parameter. In this case, the argument is x, and then it matches the parameter called n here. X has a value of 5. So typically, before we introduce the concept of pass by reference, we just put a 5 here because in pass by value, X is an expression and we evaluate the value of the expression itself. X as an expression is going to give us a value of 5. So that's why parameter n would have a value of 5. That's passing by value. But this is not passing by value anymore. This is pass by reference. So when we use pass by reference, instead of evaluating the value of the expression, we say, oh, okay, so function f will need to be able to find local variable x. Where is local variable x? It is in column C. So instead of writing the value, we now say this is a reference to column C. Okay, so I'm just using reference to column C. I mean, if you want to, you can spell out the entire thing. So now column D cannot store a value on its own anymore. Okay, so we'll see what to do on line 2 when we get to line 2. I will pause here, okay, to see if there are any questions about passing by reference. Yes, it's a reference to column C. So let me use that little nifty thing called yeah, this is a reference to column C, which means a way to find column C. It's referencing to column C whatever value is in column C at that time. Yep. Is that okay? All right. But this is important, okay, because this is a new concept, and this concept also exists in most programming languages. Even though they may not be called pass by reference, there's usually a mechanism to do about the same thing. So when we get to line 2, okay, so that here's the big question. What do we do on line 2? So we'll start with the right-hand side. The right-hand side of the assignment on line 2 says, oh, we need to get the value of n. How do we find n? The same way as usual, okay, which is the rightmost column that is labeled n. So we look up all the columns and say, which one is labeled n? What is the rightmost column that is labeled n? Ah, it is column D. Okay, same mechanism. But then when we say, what is the value that we use here for computing this addition? Um, column D itself does not have a value, but it tells me to look up column C. Okay, so now I look up column C, and column C at this point, if you look up, has a value of 5. So that means this n over here is telling me to go to column C. Column C is the one that says it has a value of 5. 5 plus 1 is a 6. So now I have resolved the right-hand side of the assignment. That value of 6 needs to be stored to n again. So once again, I ask, where am I supposed to store the value of 6? I do not overwrite column D because column D just says, hey, don't touch me, okay? Go to column C. Whatever you need to do, go to column C. If you need to find the value, go to column C. If you need to update a value, go to column C. Don't update me, okay? So that means the update is not for column D, but instead it is for column C. Column C is the one that is now updated to a value of 6. All right, so I'm going to pause again to see if there are any questions about the mechanism of passing by reference. The parameter itself is not holding the value to be read. It is not going to change if you change it. It is whatever column it is referencing that will provide the value when you need to read it, or will have the value updated if you're writing to it. Are we doing okay so far with that concept? Mm-hmm. Sort of, yes. Yeah, so the way we look up the parameter is the same, which is the rightmost column with the name of the parameter that you're referencing. But when you need to read the value of the parameter, then it goes like, oh, wait, that column itself does not have a value they can read, but it tells you where to find it. So it tells you to find it in column C in this case. So when we read on row 7 of the trace, we're reading the value of 5. But when we need to update it, we are not updating column D because column D tells us whatever you need to do, go to column C. So we need to update column C on line 2 when we execute line 2. Yes, that is correct. Yeah, column D is no more than just saying, hey, don't look at me, look at column C. Hmm. So we call that a reference. Okay, so that term reference is actually somewhat technical in programming. So it's not just in C++ that we have the term reference. In Java programming, we also have the term reference, which is basically saying, I don't have the actual value. Okay, if you need to do something, I can tell you where to find it. Okay. Um, Years ago when I teach this class, I would use the library as an example. Okay, so when I say, okay, I need to go read a book. Okay, I can either give you the book itself, or I can give you a reference number so you can find the book in the library. But I think that example may not be very suitable anymore because how many people in this class knows what is a reference number? In the context of using the library. See, some people do, and most people do not know. You know what is a reference number? Okay, so if you need to look up computer science books, what is usually the first two letters of the book? Yes. Nope. The reference number for most books related to computer science, like algorithms or programming languages or compilers or and the like, is usually QA. Yep, QA, and I think the first digit is 8. You can probably tell how much time I spent in the library when I was a graduate student. Yes, to find a book, you do not go. It was starting to have online search. It's not even available to the web because the web did not exist when I was a grad student. So you have to go to a specific terminal in the library in order to search, for books or journals related to a certain concept. And then once you find it, then you have to find the location. Sometimes the location is already in the database. Other times you have to go to a big, huge, I don't even remember the name of that thing, but it has a lot of drawers. And then you find a book, and then it has a call number, and then you have to write down the call number, and then you go to that floor, go to the aisle, and then you have to locate the book based on the call number. So anyway, most of you do not need to do that anymore. All right. So back to the trace. Are we okay with line 9? I mean row 9, sorry. Row 9 of the trace. Why column C is the one that is updated to a 6 instead of column D? Are we good with that concept? All right. So after line 2, we get to line 3, which means everything of this particular function call need to be deallocated. So both of these need to be deallocated. But before we do that, we have to remember to continue execution on line 8. So now that we have made a note of that, now we can go ahead and remove both of these columns, okay, to deallocate both of these. So back to line 8, there's nothing to do with the return 0 in main. So now we get to post. So that's the entire um, trace of this particular program for this particular pseudocode. Well, I take it back, not pseudocode, this is actual C code. Say that one more time. So when we execute line 2, we updated column C instead of column D because we get to column D first. Okay. In other words, when we evaluate the assignment on line 2, okay, the left hand side says, hey, update N. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is to look up N. The same way that we look up any parameter, which is the rightmost column with the name N, is the column that we go like, okay, found it, except column D, which is parameter n, says, hey, don't update me. Okay, I'm just pointing to somebody else. Okay, I'm just the messenger, right? So because it is just a reference to someone else, we do not update column D. We update whatever it refers to, which is column C. And that's why column C is the one that is updated on line 2 instead of column D. Is that okay? All right. So once again, this is available to all of you right now. If you want to use this as a basis and then add your own notes, you can do so. All right. Are we good so far? Okay. All right. So I will give you another sample program. Okay. So this is sheet 2, which is corresponding to this code. Yes. Line 5 is does not do a single thing. Line 5 is just the declaration of a local variable. So it is, I mean, between line 5 and 4 and 5 is all done by here. So if you look at row 3 and 4 of the trace, that's kind of a combination of line 4 and 5. Yep. Sorry? Okay. All right, cool. All right. So now we have an interesting mechanism because it means a function can now modify something that belongs to somebody else. So the question is, how far back can it do it? Okay. In other words, if there's another function in between, okay, if I have a function g, which is also using a pass by reference parameter, can that be passed along? Okay. So there are four things that we can think about. Okay. We can think about this. Okay. So let me use a text editor to specify what I want to talk about. Okay, so I'm gonna write the code here, but I will make some modifications. Okay, so we'll have function f with an integer n. Okay, and gets n plus one, and we'll use the conventional break it up into several lines so that we can capture what each line is going to do. We have function g int n, and all it's going to do is to call function f with the same n here. And then we have main, which has a local variable x. X gets some initial value, let's say 5. It calls g with the local variable x as the argument, return 0. Okay, so there are 4 variations of this code. Okay, so I'm going to specify the 4 variations. This is variation 1. This is variation 2. This is variation 3. And this is variation 4. Okay, and all 4 will do something that is slightly different. Okay, so what we'll do is we're going to examine all 4 variations, and I'll capture everything in the Google Sheets. Okay, so that means you don't have to frantically try to capture everything on the projector. Okay, because the whole idea is for you guys to focus on the concept and not so much on, oh, I need to copy everything onto my notes here. And I'm also making sure that we're still recording. So the screen, my voice, they're all being recorded. So you just have to write down your thoughts, okay, in your notes, okay? And then after the class, then you can integrate your thoughts into a copy of the spreadsheet that I'm capturing right now. All right. So that's one way to kind of take this class, okay? Do you need to do it that way? No, you can do it in many other ways. So we'll start with the first variation, which is nothing is passed by reference, which is going to be a little bit boring because those are the things that we already know how to do. So I'm going to use another sheet here. So I will say this one is by val, because the first one is passed by reference and the second one is also passed by reference. So I will just call this by val, and I'll do a screenshot like this. And this time I will put it onto the clipboard so that I can paste it into the spreadsheet itself, like so. Okay, so this way, in the spreadsheet, we know what code we are tracking. Same as usual. There's nothing really to capture with comments. So, whether you want to leave a comment for that, doesn't leave a column for that, that's up to you. Okay, so we'll try to execute this code. So between line 9 and 10, we start execution. So line 9, x, allocates a column for x. X starts with an unknown value. On line 11, x finally gets a value of 5. And then we get to line 12, which calls g. Every time you call a function, you first have to allocate columns for the parameters, and then a way to return back to the caller, and then the local variables, if any. So right now we have only one parameter to g, so that means we need to allocate for n, which is the name of the parameter to g, and it starts with a value of 5. Okay, because this time uh, parameter n of g is not passed by reference, it is passed by value. Can somebody remind me how to differentiate between passed by reference versus passed by value? What looks different when it is passed by reference? But syntactically, what does it look? How does it look like? In other words, how can I tell from looking at the code here? How can I tell this n, of on line 5 is passed by value as opposed to passed by reference? Yes, it int is the type of the parameter, which means that what kind of value can be passed as an argument to parameter n. It's the ampersand. Okay, the lack of an ampersand means it is passed by value. If there's an ampersand, it means it is passed by reference. So the ampersand is the most important part if you need to know, are we passing by value or are we passing by reference? So in this case, there's no ampersand right before n, which means it is passed by value. Is that okay? So it's a very minor thing. When you look at it, you can miss it really quickly or easily. Okay. So now we have return line number. After line 12, we need to go back to line 13. There we go. All right. And now we can continue execution on line 5. Line 5 doesn't do a single thing. And then on line 6, we have to call a function again. And this time it is calling function f. So what line 6 needs to do is look at this n over here and say, do we know the value of this expression? First of all, is it passed by reference or passed by value? Is n as a parameter of f? Is it passed by value or is it passed by reference? How can we tell which way it is? I just talked about it. So let me point to the correct code here. Not this one. Okay, this one needs to go away. So we don't confuse ourselves. We're looking at this one here. So is this parameter n of f, is it passed by value or is it passed by reference? How can we tell? Does it have an ampersand before the n? It does not. So if it does not have an ampersand before the name of the parameter is passed by value. Okay. So if it is passed by value, that means when we are invoking the function, we basically just treat this particular n here as an expression. Okay, an expression like 1 plus 2. Okay, in other words, we just have to evaluate this expression and say, okay, what is the value of that expression? This n is referring to the rightmost column that is already labeled n, which is column D. Column D has a value of 5. So f of n on line 6 right now is the same thing as f of 5. So that means when we set up the function call of f, we have to allocate another column for n because they have the same name, which is fine. It is also 5 in this case. The return line number is going to be whatever is after line 6, which is line 7. So now we set up those two columns, and now we are ready to go to function f. So when we get to function f, we get to line 1, and then we get to line 2. So what do we do on line 2? Line 2 is an assignment operation. We have to evaluate the right-hand side first. The right-hand side says, okay, we need to find out what is the value of n. So when we need to look up a local variable or a parameter, it's the same mechanism. The rightmost column that is labeled, in this case, n. So can someone name the column that is the rightmost column that is labeled n at this point? Which column are we looking at? Sorry? Column F. That is correct. So column F has a value of 5. So this is 5 here. 5 plus 1 is a 6. Great. We have the right-hand side, but we need to update the left-hand side. The left-hand side is also referencing n. And can someone tell me again which column we are talking about here? Column F. That is correct. So column F is the one that is updated to a value of 6. And you can see that this does not change this nor this. Okay? We update this one. And then what is the next thing we're going to do? We get to line 3. Line 3 is going to say, oh, where do I need to return to continue execution? Line 7. Okay, fine. We'll get back to line 7. And then at that point, we deallocate all the columns associated with the invocation of f. So both of these columns are gone at this point. so is the value of 6. So all that n plus 1 is for nothing. It doesn't change any other column. It just changes column F, column D stays the same, column C stays the same. Are we doing okay so far? All right. So now we continue execution on line 7. Line 7 is the end of function g, which means now we do the same thing as the other one, which is to deallocate. Wait, okay, we cannot do that yet. I have to copy the 13 over here to remind myself that the next line that I need to go back to is line 13. And then after that, I know I have no use of these columns anymore. So both of these columns are deallocated on line when we execute line 7. So once again, strike them out. So now we continue execution on line 13. Line 13 is return 0 of main, which also means we can now deallocate this column, which is column C as well. Mark it as deallocated. And then we get to post. That would be the trace of the first version of the 4 variations. So let me see if there are any questions about this particular trace. This one is classic. Okay, this is the way we understand parameters and also function calls, consistent with what we already know by last Wednesday. So is everybody okay with this particular trace? There's no pass by reference whatsoever in this one. So we're good. Okay, all right. So now we can move on to the next one. Okay, so the next one is going to be very similar with a minor difference. So I'm going to, I think I can do this. I can duplicate the entire thing here, change it to by ref by val. Okay, and then we'll get rid of this. And I'm debating whether to start all over. Let's do that. Let's just start all over here and then go back to the original code, and we'll change one of these to by reference. I will change this one to pass by reference. So once again, passing by reference means there's an syntactically, the way we can tell whether a parameter is passed by reference is whether there is an ampersand before the name of the parameter. Okay, so that's how we can differentiate between passing by value versus passing by reference. All right, so we'll do the same thing. Um, oh, that's not what I want to do. I want to do a, there we go. There we go. All right, so I'm going to take another snapshot here. Save it to the clipboard, go to the new sheet, just paste it here. Okay, this is the code that we're going to track down this time, and then we'll get started. So between line 9 and 10, okay, same thing. Oh, this is the precondition, nothing to say. On line 9, column, we allocate a column for x, and then it starts with an unknown value, and then it gets updated to 5 on line 11. So this part is identical to the one right before, and then we get to line 12. So this time when we get to line 12, we have to do things a little bit differently. The reason why we have to do things a little bit differently is on this particular line 12, when you invoke a function, you first have to look at how we're supposed to pass the parameters. So in this case, parameter n of g is passed by reference, which means when we look at this argument of x, we go like, okay, we just need to find out where x lives as a column, and then we'll have n to remember that. Okay, so are we okay with that statement? Passing by reference means when you're invoking the function, the parameter needs to tell you where to find what you use as the argument. So in this case, when we allocate a column for n, it's fine. Okay, we're going to use column D just like in the other one. And then we have return line number here. Return line number is the easy one. We just return to line 13. But n, as a pass by reference parameter, needs to tell the function that we're calling, which is function g, where to find X. X is living in column C, so now we have a reference to column C. This is the first difference between this version of the code versus the one before. Okay, is what do we put into column D? Column D does not have a value of 5. Instead, it is saying, okay, don't look at me, look at column C. Okay, if you need to do something, go to column C. Is that okay? All right. Then we continue execution in G, starting on line 5, which doesn't do a single thing. And then we get to line 6. So line 6 is now going like, okay, we need to call function f. And using the argument of n, this n refers to the n of G. So now we ask, okay, wait, I cannot do anything yet, okay? Because I have to first find out what is parameter n of f. Is it passed by reference or is it passed by value? Which way is it? It's passed by value because it doesn't have an ampersand, okay? If it is passed by value, that means the argument is seen as just an expression, a general expression of whatever the expression turns out to be. The parameter n of f in this case will start with that value. Okay, so it's passed by value like that. So that means, okay, so on line 6, we have to allocate the next available column for n, and then the next one for return line number, which is kind of the same as what we did before. Return line number is the easy one because the call itself is on line 6. That means when it is done, it has to continue on line 7. That's the easy one. This n here, what should I put here? So we have two choices. We can either write down a 5 or we can write down reference to column C. Which way should it be? 5, that is correct. Okay, because when we evaluate this expression n on line 6, it is saying, okay, go find me n. At that time, column F is not set up yet. So at that time, the rightmost column that is labeled n is column D. Column D says, oh, don't look at me, look at column C. Column C says, I have a value of 5. So that means when we evaluate the argument, when we call f, this n has a value of 5. And because we are passing by value here, so that means the new column that we are setting up, column f, simply has a value of 5. Is that okay? So we have to differentiate between which n are we looking at. On line 6, when we execute line 6, this n is referring to column D, but column D says, don't look at me, look at column C. Column C is the one that provides a value of 5, and that's why we are passing a value of 5 to function f, because function f says that parameter n is passed by value. Is that okay? All right. So now we get to function f starting on line 1. This is line 2. And this n on line 2 is referring to the rightmost column that is labeled n, which is column f. Column f says, yep, I have a value of 5. Okay, use that value of 5. 5 plus 1 is a 6. We now store the 6 back into n. Once again, we look up the rightmost column that is labeled n, which is again column f. Column f did not tell me to go to some other column. So if it doesn't tell me to go to some other column, I'm just going to update that column to a value of 6. So now we are getting to line 3. So at this point, things are going to be about the same as last time. We now deallocate these two columns, and then is that a strikeout? Looks like a strikeout to me. I don't, okay. So maybe I shifted everything by one column, by one row somewhere. So now we get back to line 7. Line 7 does not have anything to do, and it is going to deallocate these two columns instead. And before doing that, I have to remember to continue on line 13. So now these two are deallocated. On line 13, we also have to deallocate column C. which is used for variable x. So now that is also deallocated, and then we get to post. Are there any questions about this trace? So as it turns out, it is almost the same as the previous one. We did not end up changing column C, but the change is um, this column D is not having its own value either. Are we doing okay so far? Mm-hmm. 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 In this case, we are not reallocating a particular column because the structure of the code does not need to do that. Yep. Mm-hmm. All right. So these are two different traces. I'm not sure why they're off by one row. Oh, because this one does not have a pre. That's why. So we'll go ahead and give it a pre, which is not really useful because there's nothing to say with the precondition, but to be consistent. All right. So the next one is going to be, oh, let me get rid of this. Instead, I'm going to make a copy of this, duplicate. All right. So this one's going to be by uh, val by ref. Okay, so get rid of the code here, get rid of the trace here, and then we'll switch back to this code. And this time we'll change the pass by reference to function f, and function g is now passed by value. Is that okay? Does everybody understand how to differentiate between whether a parameter is passed by value, like this one, or it is passed by reference, which is this one? The ampersand is the key. Okay. All right. So we'll do the same trick. Take a snapshot of this. Okay. And then go to the sheet over here and paste it over here. All right. Precondition starting on line 9 doesn't do a single thing other than allocating for local variable x, starting with an unknown value. On line 11, x is updated to a value of 5, same as the other two traces. On line 12 this time, once again, when we need to call a function, we need to find out, are we passing for each argument, are we passing by value or are we passing by reference? So now we look at line 12, we have to call function g. Function g has one parameter. It is passed by value, which means at this point, what I will do is I will evaluate x as an expression, which means, oh, just find out what that expression is as a value. X has a value of 5, and that's it, okay? So that means n as an argument is going to only have a value of 5 because it is passed by value. And then we have return line number to line 13. And that's how we're going to set it up when we call function g. And then function g starts on line 5, doesn't do a single thing. When we get to line 6, function g is going to call function f. So again, when you call a function, for each argument, you have to find out whether the parameter, the matching parameter, is passed by value or passed by reference. This argument is passed to this parameter. It is passed by reference. So that means whatever I specify as an argument, the parameter needs to tell the function that I'm calling where to find this thing here. So when we are setting it up, how can we find n of g? This one is passed by reference. So what do we need to write here? So once again, we are at the beginning of line 6. We are saying, okay, we need to call function f with an argument of n. When we say an argument of n, that n is referencing the rightmost column that is labeled n, which is column D. But this argument is passed by reference, which means function f needs to find where to find parameter n of g. Can someone tell me which column contains parameter n of g? So when I'm executing line 6, okay, we are not in function f right now. We're still on line 6, which is inside function g. So at this point of this trace, which column is n? There's only one column. You cannot mistake it. Which column? Column D. That is correct. So parameter n of g is on column D. Okay, column D is where I can find parameter n of function g, which is the context of the execution of line 6. When we need to pass n to function f, we say, oh, function f does not care about the value of parameter n of g. It needs to know where to find parameter n of function g. So I need to tell it, oh, let's go to column D to find that. Okay, so I will pause a little bit here. Okay, actually, I take it back. This is the name, and then the value, what we put in here is a reference. And then we have return line number back to line 7. So I will pause at this point. Is that okay? Whether you are going to give it a specific value, like 5, or whether you give it a reference to something else, depends on the function being called, what kind of parameter it is specifying. If the called function specifies pass by reference, then the calling code has to say, oh, this is where you can find that thing that you will need to access later. On the other hand, if the called function sets pass by value, then all you have to do is to evaluate the argument and say, oh, this argument evaluates to this particular value and start with that. So what you write down when you're allocating a column for a parameter, for an argument, depends on what is the type of the parameter. Is it passed by reference or is it passed by value? So do we have any questions, or do you guys want to talk a little bit more about what we do when we get to line 6 of the code, which is in rows 9 and 10 of the trace? Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Ampersand. Mm-hmm. It means F needs to know where to find the argument that you used in the call. Yep. Inside function F. So we are not quite there yet. Okay. Yeah. It's hard for me to process auditory information like that. So when you describe your thoughts, in an auditory way, yet it's hard for me to check it. But if you have any specific question about where we are at in the trace, I would be happy to process those questions. Okay, okay. So by the time we are done with the four examples, hopefully, the examples will help people understand, what to do in each case. Why they are slightly different. All right. So now that we have set up all the parameter and also the return line number, we can now continue execution in function f, starting with line 1, doesn't do a single thing. This is line 2. So when we get to line 2 of the code, we have to evaluate the right-hand side first. The right-hand side says we need to find the value of n. This is referring to parameter n of f. Parameter n of f, where do we find parameter n of f? Which column has it? Is it column D or is it column F? It's column F. Because when we execute line 2, whenever we want to find a local variable or parameter, the rule does not change. What is the rightmost column that is labeled N? Well, what do you think? It is column F, the rightmost, rightmost. Yes, but when the first thing is to find where the parameter is, parameter n on line 2 refers to the rightmost column that is labeled n, which is column F. I look at column F and go like, okay, give me a value. Column F says, don't look at me, look at column D. So now we look at column D, which now has a value of 5. Okay, so it's one step indirect or one step deferred by the time we get to the value of 5. The value of 5 is added to the value of 1, we have 6. The right-hand side of the assignment is 6. We update n again. So now we ask the same question. Where do we find n? The rightmost column that is labeled n. That's column F. So we go like, can I update you, column F? Column F says, nope, don't look at me. Look at column D. So column D is the one that is going to be updated to a value of 6 on line 2, like so. Oops, nope, not this one. This one over here. Are we doing okay so far with this? All right. So you have to separate all the steps, okay, and know when to apply what technique within the steps, okay. So now we are done with this. We go to line 3. Which columns are we deallocating? Because when we get to the end of a function, we're going to deallocate something. So the question is, what am I deallocating when we are done executing my function f? It's always going to be the rightmost column or columns, okay, if they're multiple. So can someone tell me which two columns are involved in the invocation of column of function f? There are two columns involved. Which two? F and G, okay? So column F and column G are involved in the invocation of function f. So by the time we are done at the end of function f, both of those columns need to be deallocated. But before we do that, we take a note of the return line number, and we just remind ourselves, okay, we have to continue execution on line 7, and then we can now deallocate both of these columns, like so. And now execution continues on line 7. Line 7 is also the end of a function. So now we have to ask the question, which column or columns are associated with the invocation of function g? E is not. E is one of them, but there's one more. Remember, what is involved in a function call? Parameters, how we're going to return, and local variables. So there's one more column associated with the invocation of function g. Which one is it? It'll be, say again, E and D. That is correct. Both of those. So before we deallocate, we say we have to continue execution on line 13. Now we can proceed to get rid of these two. Okay, mark them as deallocated. We get to line 13, which is the end of main. So at that time, column C can also be deallocated, like so. And then we get to post. So we are running out of time. I cannot give you, at this point, the last case, which is by reference and by reference, which means which means function G is passed by reference, and so is function S. It is also passed by reference. So which is good in a way, because you can use it as an exercise. Okay. Next Monday, we'll talk about the case of by ref, which is the same code, except function G is also going to be passing by reference, and function F is also passed by reference. So, after the exam on Wednesday, over the weekend, this is what you can practice. Is that okay? But don't forget, on Wednesday, we have exam 2, which is not including anything about functions, but it does include arrays. Okay, so you need to make sure that you review the material. It is still open book and open notes. Bring anything on paper that is on paper. You can bring a book, you can bring all your notes, you can bring my notes, you can bring whatever that is on paper. All right. All right, so I do have office hours before exam 2. So if you have any questions, please make use of the office hours. Hmm.